Richmond, Virginia, 2025. The sun hung low over Greenview Estates, a pristine enclave of manicured lawns and stately homes, where wealth whispered through ivy-covered fences. But the serenity of this upscale neighborhood shattered under the piercing voice of Margaret Hensley, a woman whose rage sliced through the warm September air like a blade. "You don't belong here," she shrieked, her finger jabbing toward James Carter, a tall, composed black man standing in a torn tuxedo, flecks of white wedding cake clinging to his lapel. Behind him, the remnants of what should have been the happiest day of his life lay in ruins: overturned catering tables, trampled flower arrangements, and wedding guests huddled in stunned silence. Margaret's face was a mask of contempt, her eyes blazing with a venom that seemed to burn hotter with every word. "I don't care how much money you threw at this house. This is my neighborhood," she spat, her voice trembling with indignation. James, however, stood unmoved, his dark eyes steady, a faint smile curling at the corner of his lips. There was a quiet authority in his posture, a knowing glint that suggested he held a truth Margaret couldn't fathom. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low but edged with steel, "you might want to rethink that phone call." But Margaret was beyond reason, her hands fumbling for her phone as she dialed 911, her voice rising to a theatrical wail. "There's a gang in my neighbor's yard. They're threatening me. I saw weapons. Send every officer you've got." As the distant wail of sirens began to swell, James's calm demeanor remained unbroken, his gaze fixed on Margaret as if he could see the unraveling of her world already unfolding. She had no idea who she was dealing with, no clue that her actions were about to ignite a firestorm that would consume everything she held dear. The guests, still reeling from the chaos, exchanged nervous glances, their elegant attire now streaked with dirt and food. Emily Harris, James's fiancée, stood frozen beside a shattered wedding arch, her white gown stained with grass and tears. The scene was a grotesque parody of the intimate celebration they had planned, a day meant to seal their love now defiled by one woman's hatred. And yet, James's quiet confidence hinted at a reckoning Margaret could never have anticipated. James Carter was no ordinary man. At 34, he was the youngest governor in Virginia's history, a figure whose rise from humble beginnings had captivated the state. Born to a mechanic father and a nurse's aide mother in the working-class neighborhood of Carver, James had clawed his way to the top through sheer grit scholarships to elite schools, late nights studying law, and a relentless commitment to public service. He shunned the trappings of power, refusing to live in the governor's mansion and opting instead for a quiet life with Emily, a 31-year-old cardiothoracic surgeon whose brilliance matched his own. Emily, the daughter of a retired bus driver, had paid for her medical education with loans and part-time jobs, her hands as skilled at saving lives as James's were at navigating the complexities of politics. Together, they had purchased their dream home in Greenview Estates, a sprawling brick colonial with wide windows and a backyard perfect for the small, heartfelt wedding they envisioned. Their goal was simple: a private ceremony surrounded by family and friends, far from the glare of James's public life. But their arrival in this exclusive neighborhood had stirred something dark in Margaret Hensley, the 60-year-old heiress of Hensley & Sons, a once-proud construction company now teetering on the edge of bankruptcy. Margaret's Victorian mansion next door was a monument to a fading legacy, its grandeur mocked by the financial ruin creeping closer with every failed contract. Her last hope was a state infrastructure deal worth millions, a contract that required the approval of none other than Governor James Carter, man she had never met but whose signature could save her from ruin. The irony was a cruel twist of fate. The neighbor she despised was the very person who held her future in his hands. Margaret's resentment had simmered from the moment she saw James and Emily moving in. their laughter as they unpacked boxes. The sleek Mercedes in their driveway, the effortless grace of their success, it all gnawed at her. She stood at her window, curtains parted just enough to spy, her mind weaving a narrative of intrusion and affront. To her, they were outsiders, their presence a blemish on the pristine canvas of Greenview Estates. Her first encounter with them had been a calculated performance. Clutching a plate of store-bought cookies, she crossed the lawn to their front door, her smile as brittle as glass. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm Margaret Hensley. We have standards here." James, ever the diplomat, extended a hand. "Thank you, Mrs. Hensley. I'm James, and this is my fiancée, Emily. We're thrilled to be here." But Margaret's eyes were already appraising their tailored clothes, their polished manners, their undeniable success. Her lips tightened. "What do you do for a living?" she asked, her question laced with assumption. "I'm in public service." James replied simply, "And Emily's a surgeon." The answer only deepened Margaret's scowl. These weren't people she could dismiss as beneath her. They were a challenge to her fragile sense of superiority. From that day, Margaret's obsession grew like a weed, choking out any chance of neighborly peace. She watched their every move, noting the comings and goings of delivery vans, the laughter from their backyard, and the steady stream of vendors preparing for their wedding. Each moment of their happiness felt like a personal insult. When the first wedding florist arrived, Margaret stationed herself at the neighborhood's entrance, her SUV blocking the delivery truck's path. "You're in the wrong place," she snapped at the driver, a young man clutching a clipboard. "People like them don't live here." The driver, confused, insisted he had the right address, but Margaret's voice turned venomous. "I am telling you, there's been a mistake. This is my neighborhood." Her campaign of sabotage escalated daily. She called every vendor she could identify, spinning lies about canceled events and criminal activity at the Carter residence. "The wedding's off," she told a caterer, her voice oozing false concern. "The police are investigating that. House, it's not safe for your staff." Some vendors believed her, others didn't, but each call sowed chaos, delaying deliveries and fraying Emily's nerves. By midweek, Margaret's complaints to the Homeowners Association had become a daily ritual. "They're ruining this neighborhood," she ranted at board meetings. "The noise, the trucks, the people they bring in, it's unacceptable." The board, wary of her influence, listened but did nothing, leaving James and Emily to bear the brunt of her wrath. The harassment wasn't limited to logistics. Margaret's venom extended to the couple's family. When Emily's grandmother, a soft-spoken woman in her late 70s, arrived to help with decorations, Margaret confronted her at the mailbox. "This isn't your place," she hissed, looming over the elderly woman. "Go back where you came from." The grandmother, shaken, clutched her purse and hurried inside. When James's cousin Marcus drove in from out of state, Margaret blocked his path to the front door. "Lost," she sneered. "The projects are across town." Each encounter chipped away at the joy of the wedding preparations, turning what should have been a week of celebration into a gauntlet of hostility. Emily, usually unflappable in the operating room, began to crumble under the pressure. One evening, as she and James sat on their porch, she whispered, "Maybe we shouldn't have come here. Maybe this was a mistake." James took her hand, his voice firm. "We belong here, Emily. We earned this home, this life. She doesn't get to take that from us." But Margaret's attacks only grew bolder. Under the cover of night, she crept into their yard, uprooting flower beds, scattering decorative lanterns, and tossing garbage over their fence-rotted fruit, crumpled wrappers, anything to defile their space. The backyard, meant to be a sanctuary for their vows, became a daily cleanup project by Friday. The eve of the wedding, Margaret's behavior had crossed into outright vandalism. She tore down the elegant signs welcoming guests, snapped wooden trellises in half, and smeared mud across the white ribbons lining the driveway. The wedding planner, Carla Espinoza, a veteran of 2 decades in the industry, was horrified. "I've never seen anything like this," she told James, her voice trembling with indignation. "This woman is unhinged. We need to call the police." But James, ever measured, shook his head. "We're having this wedding, Carla, no matter what she does." The neighborhood watched in uneasy silence. Some residents were appalled by Margaret's actions, but too intimidated to intervene. Others whispered support to James and Emily in private. Unwilling to cross the formidable Mrs. Hensley, a few, disturbingly, seemed to share her sentiments, their silence a quiet endorsement of her prejudice. As the sun rose on Saturday, the wedding day, James and Emily clung to their resolve. The backyard, despite Margaret's sabotage, had been restored as best they could manage. The flower arch stood tall. The tables were set with linens, and the air carried the faint scent of jasmine. Guests began to arrive, family, friends, colleagues of all backgrounds, their faces bright with anticipation. The ceremony began at noon, a moment of fragile beauty as James and Emily stood hand in hand, exchanging vows under the autumn sun. But Margaret had no intention of letting the day pass peacefully. From her yard, she began shouting, her voice carrying over the fence like a storm cloud. "This is a decent neighborhood. Take your noise somewhere else." The guests tried to ignore her, focusing on the couple's promises, but her screams grew louder, more vicious. Then, as the reception began, Margaret crossed the line no one could have predicted. She climbed over the fence, her face twisted with fury, and stormed into the backyard. Guests gasped as she shoved over a catering table, sending plates of food crashing to the ground. She grabbed the 3-tiered wedding cake, Emily's pride, a creation she had designed herself, and hurled it onto the patio, the frosting splattering like blood. "You don't belong here," she screamed, her words laced with racial slurs so vile that parents shielded their children's ears. Marcus tried to intervene, grabbing her arm, but Margaret clawed at him, spitting and cursing. And then, in the midst of the chaos, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "There's a gang here," she cried to the dispatcher, her voice a mix of hysteria and triumph. "They're armed, they're dangerous, they're threatening to kill me. Send everyone." The guests stood frozen, the weight of her lies sinking in. James, his tuxedo now smeared with cake, stepped forward, his voice calm but resolute. "Stay calm, everyone. This will be over soon." But as the sirens grew louder, a chill ran through the crowd. They all knew the danger of a false report like this, the risk of police arriving, expecting a threat. Emily, kneeling beside the ruins of her cake, looked up at James, her eyes filled with fear and heartbreak. The day they had dreamed of was now a battlefield, and Margaret Hensley, standing amid the wreckage she had caused, had no idea that she had just set in motion her own spectacular downfall. The wail of sirens sliced through the autumn air of Greenview Estates, Richmond, Virginia. As for police cruisers, screeched to a halt outside James and Emily Carter's home. Red and blue lights pulsed against the elegant colonial houses, casting an eerie glow over the wreckage of what was meant to be a joyous wedding. Officers leaped from their vehicles, hands poised on holsters, expecting to confront the armed gang Margaret Hensley had described in her frantic 911 call. Instead, they found a scene that defied comprehension. Shattered glassware strewn across the lawn, a toppled wedding cake smeared on the patio, and a crowd of well-dressed guests, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, clinging to each other in shock. Children hid behind their parents. Elderly relatives sat trembling on folding chairs. And Emily, her wedding gown stained with dirt and tears, knelt beside the ruins of her dream day. Margaret, wild-eyed and triumphant, rushed toward the lead officer, Michael Brooks, her arms flailing dramatically. "Thank God you're here," she cried, her voice a theatrical blend of fear and indignation. "They're criminals," they threatened. "To kill me. Arrest them all." But Michael, a grizzled veteran with 25 years on the force, surveyed the scene with growing unease. This wasn't a gang hideout. It was a wedding, or what was left of one. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the crowd, landing on James Carter, standing tall despite his torn tuxedo and the chaos around him. There was something familiar about the man's calm demeanor, the quiet authority in his posture. Michael's gut told him this was no ordinary situation. And Margaret's hysterics were starting to ring hollow. James stepped forward, his voice steady as he addressed the officers. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, his words carrying a weight that made the younger officers pause. "This is our wedding. We're not criminals. We're victims of harassment." Margaret's face contorted with rage. "Listen to him," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger. "They're dealing drugs. They had guns, knives, everything. They said they'd burn this neighborhood down." Her performance was over the top, a desperate attempt to sell her lies. But the officers exchanged skeptical glances. The scene before them, elegant decorations, terrified grandparents. A bride in tears bore no resemblance to the violent threat Margaret had described. Michael's partner, Officer Laura Chen, leaned in and whispered, "Does this look like a gang to you?" Michael shook his head, his gaze returning to James. There was something about the man's face, the way he carried himself, that tugged at a memory. He'd seen that face before on television, at press conferences, in campaign ads. Then, like a thunderclap, it hit him. "Governor Carter," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The words landed like a bomb, silencing the crowd. The other officers froze, their hands dropping from their weapons. The guests gasped, some murmuring in realization, others still too shaken to process. Margaret's mouth fell open, her eyes darting between James and the officers. "Governor," she stammered, her voice cracking. "What are you talking about?" Michael, his face paling, reached for his radio, his hands trembling slightly. "Dispatch. This is Brooks. I need immediate confirmation on Governor James Carter's location. Urgent." The radio crackled with a confused reply. "Officer Brooks. The governor has no public events today. No security detail assigned." "Why?" Michael's voice was tight. "Because I'm standing in front of him, and we just responded to a call claiming he's leading an armed gang." The silence on the other end was deafening, mirroring the stunned atmosphere in the backyard. The officers, now fully aware of the gravity of the situation, turned their attention to Margaret, whose bravado was crumbling. Her eyes widened in panic as the reality of her mistake began to dawn. No, that's not possible," she muttered, staggering back. "He can't be the governor." But the pieces were falling into place, each one a hammer blow too. Her unraveling world. James was the man she was scheduled to meet in 2 days. The man whose approval she needed for a state contract that could save her failing company. Hensley and Sons, the man she had just accused of being a drug-dealing gang leader. The man whose wedding she had destroyed with her own hands. As the officers began to process the scene, the wedding guests started to find their voices. Emily's father, Samuel Harris, a retired bus driver with a gentle demeanor, stepped forward, his hands shaking with suppressed anger. "This woman has been terrorizing us for weeks," he said, his voice raw. "She's thrown garbage in our yard, insulted my mother, and harassed our family. And today, she ruined my daughter's wedding." Carla Espinoza, the wedding planner, produced her phone, showing photos of vandalized decorations and torn signage, evidence of Margaret's week-long campaign of sabotage. "I've been doing this for 20 years, Carla said, her voice steady but furious. "I've never seen anyone act with such malice." The officers listened, their expressions hardening as they realized the scope of Margaret's actions. Michael turned to her, his tone now cold and professional. "Ma'am, we need to discuss your 911 call. You reported weapons and a gang. Are they?" Margaret's eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape. "I thought I saw something," she stammered. "I was scared. I was protecting the neighborhood." But her excuses fell flat. The evidence was undeniable: a destroyed wedding, traumatized guests, and a false report that had summoned a small army of police to the governor's home. The situation escalated as more neighbors emerged from their homes, drawn by the flashing lights and growing commotion. Some looked horrified, others embarrassed, as if Margaret's actions cast a shadow over the entire community. A few, to their shame, seemed quietly satisfied, their silence a tacit approval of her prejudice. But the tide was turning against Margaret. A guest, James's cousin Marcus, had been recording the chaos on his phone, capturing Margaret's tirade, her racial slurs, her destruction of the cake, her unhinged rage. The video, uploaded to social media, was already spreading like wildfire, racking up thousands of views within minutes. Hashtags like #GREENVIEW wedding and #racist-neighbor began trending, and news vans were en route, their satellite dishes soon to crowd the pristine streets of Greenview Estates. Margaret, oblivious to the digital storm brewing, continued her desperate pleas. "You don't understand," she cried, clutching at Michael's arm. "They don't belong here. This is a respectable neighborhood." But the officers, now fully aware they were dealing with the governor, ignored her, their focus shifting to securing the scene and gathering statements. James, despite the devastation around him, remained a pillar of composure. He guided guests to the house, ensuring children were safe inside and elderly relatives were cared for. Emily, her face streaked with tears, clung to his arm, her dream day reduced to rubble. "This was supposed to be ours," she whispered, her voice breaking. James pulled her close, his jaw tight. "It still is, Emily. She can't take that from us." But the weight of the moment was heavy. They both knew the danger of Margaret's lies, the risk of police arriving with guns drawn, expecting a threat. In America, such misunderstandings could turn deadly, especially for a black man, governor or not. Yet James refused to let fear define him. He addressed the officers with the same clarity he used in State House meetings. "I want this handled by the book," he said. "No one leaves until we get to the bottom of this." His words carried the weight of authority, and the officers nodded, their respect for him evident despite the surreal context. As the investigation deepened, the scope of Margaret's actions came into sharper focus. Witnesses recounted her week of harassment, the lies to vendors, the vandalism, the racial insults hurled at family members. Emily's grandmother, still shaken, described how Margaret had confronted her at the mailbox, her words dripping with contempt. Marcus spoke of being blocked from entering the house, mocked with slurs about the projects. The wedding planner provided a detailed timeline of Margaret's sabotage, from ruined flower beds to canceled deliveries. The officers, now treating the backyard as a crime scene, photographed the wreckage, the smashed cake, the overturned tables, the scattered decorations. Michael's radio buzzed with updates from dispatch, confirming James's identity and the absence of any credible threat. The realization that they had responded to a false report accusing the governor of being a gang leader sent a chill through the team. The political fallout would be immense, the media frenzy inevitable. Michael turned to Margaret, his voice like ice. "You're coming with us. We're charging you with filing a false police report, vandalism, and harassment. And given the racial nature of your actions, we're looking at hate crime enhancements." Margaret's world collapsed in that moment. Handcuffs clicked around her wrists, the sound echoing like a death knell. She looked around, her eyes wild with panic, as if searching for someone to save her. But the neighbors who once deferred to her status now turned away, their faces a mix of shame and disgust. The guests, emboldened by James's calm leadership, began to speak out, their voices a chorus of condemnation. The video Marcus had uploaded was now viral, with news outlets picking up the story. Headlines blazed across screens. Racist neighbor destroys governor's wedding. Virginia woman arrested for hate-fueled rampage. Hensley and Sons, already on the brink, faced immediate backlash. Clients canceled contracts, suppliers demanded payment, and the company's social media accounts were flooded with outrage. By evening, Greenview Estates was a media circus, with reporters broadcasting live from the Carter's lawn, their cameras capturing the wreckage of the wedding and Margaret's perp walk to the police car. James and Emily, standing amidst the chaos, faced the press with quiet dignity. James, still in his ruined tuxedo, spoke to the cameras, his voice steady. "Today was meant to be a celebration of love," he said. Instead, it became a reminder that hate still lingers in our communities, but we won't let it define us. We'll rebuild, and we'll keep loving, because that's stronger than any prejudice. Emily, her hand in his, added, "This is our home, and no one can take that from us." Their words, broadcast live, resonated across the state, a testament to their resilience. Margaret, meanwhile, sat in the back of a cruiser, her face a mask of disbelief. The woman who had started the day as the self-appointed guardian of Greenview Estates was now a pariah. Her business in tatters, her name synonymous with hatred. She had targeted a black couple for daring to live next door, unaware that one of them held the power to shape her future. The irony was devastating. Her desperation to save her company had led her to destroy it. And the man she had called an animal was the governor she had hoped to impress. As the police car pulled away, Margaret's future hung in the balance, her actions a cautionary tale of how hatred could consume not just a wedding, but an entire life. The courtroom in downtown Richmond, Virginia, was a crucible of tension, its oak-paneled walls absorbing the weight of a story that had gripped the state. Margaret Hensley sat in the defendant's chair, her once impeccable appearance replaced by a haggard, hollow-looked disheveled hair, smudged makeup, and eyes that darted nervously, as if searching for an escape from the consequences of her actions. The charges against her were severe: filing a false police report, vandalism, criminal harassment, and, most damning, hate crime enhancements due to the racial vitriol she had unleashed at James and Emily Carter's wedding. The media frenzy had been relentless, with headlines branding her as the racist wedding crasher and her company, Hensley and Sons, now a shell of its former self, hemorrhaging clients and contracts. Margaret faced up to 5 years in prison, a prospect that left her trembling as she awaited the judge's ruling. But the room held its breath when James Carter, the governor of Virginia, walked in, his presence commanding yet serene, his torn wedding tuxedo replaced by a tailored suit that spoke of his authority. He wasn't here to gloat or demand vengeance. Instead, he was about to do something that would stun everyone present, offering a glimpse of grace that would redefine the narrative of hate and redemption in Greenview Estates. Margaret's lawyer had prepared her for the worst. The evidence was overwhelming. Witness testimonies from wedding guests, photos of the destroyed decorations, and Marcus's viral video capturing her racial slurs and the cake-smashing rampage. The public outcry had been deafening, with social media platforms flooded with calls for her to face the maximum penalty. Hensley and Sons was effectively dead at stock price in freefall, its board scrambling to distance itself from her name. Margaret, who had once prided herself on her status in Greenview Estates, was now a national symbol of prejudice, her mugshot plastered across every news outlet. Yet, as James took the stand, the courtroom fell silent. "Your Honor," he began, His voice steady and resonant. "I ask that Ms. Hensley's charges be reduced to misdemeanors, with conditions that reflect accountability and change." Murmurs rippled through the gallery. Here was a man whose wedding had been obliterated, whose family had been terrorized with racial slurs, offering mercy to the woman who had orchestrated it all. Ms. Hensley must serve 6 months of community service in the communities she targeted with her hatred, James continued. She must complete sensitivity training to confront the impact of her actions. And she must prove, through deeds, not words, that she is capable of transformation. Margaret, tears streaming down her face, stared at him in disbelief. The man she had called an animal, whose life she had tried to ruin, was offering her a lifeline she didn't deserve. Judge Evelyn Carter, a no-sense jurist with a reputation for fairness, studied James for a long moment before turning to Margaret. "Ms. Hensley," she said, her voice cutting through the tension, "you are receiving an extraordinary gift. Governor Carter could have sought your ruin, and no one would have questioned it. Instead, he's giving you a chance to rebuild what you've broken, starting with yourself. Do not squander it." The gavel fell, sealing Margaret's fate. No prison time, but a rigorous path of restitution. Her community service was assigned to the Frederick Douglass Community Center in Richmond's predominantly black East Side, a place she had once dismissed as the other side of town. The first day was a trial by fire. Margaret arrived clutching her court papers, her stomach churning as she faced the center's director, Dr. Lena Thompson, a formidable woman with a doctorate in social work and no patience for pretense. "You're here because you have to be," Lena said, her eyes boring into Margaret. "But if I see even a hint of the attitude you showed at that wedding, you're gone." Margaret nodded, her throat tight, and stepped into a world that would challenge every assumption she had ever held. The community center was a hive of activity, clean, organized, and pulsing with purpose. Families gathered for after-school programs. Seniors played chess in the lounge, and young entrepreneurs met to plan their futures. Margaret's first task was humbling: cleaning bathrooms and mopping floors, work she hadn't done since her teenage years. The physical labor was grueling, but the stares were worse. Some recognized her from the news, their hostility palpable. A young mother, Sarah, glared as she passed, muttering, "That's the woman from the wedding video." Margaret kept her head down, scrubbing tiles in silence, her mind replaying the moment she had smashed Emily's wedding cake, the slurs she had screamed. Shame gnawed at her, a feeling she had never allowed herself to confront. But she showed up the next day, and the next, determined to prove she could endure. Slowly, she began to listen. She overheard conversations about resilience, parents working multiple jobs, kids dreaming of college, community leaders organizing food drives. These were not the stereotypes she had clung to. They were people with lives as complex and vibrant as her own. 2 months into her service, Lena approached Margaret with a new assignment. "We're launching a small business program," she said. "You ran a construction company. You know business. Are you willing to share that knowledge?" Margaret hesitated. The idea of mentoring felt like a leap she wasn't ready for, but she nodded, sensing this was her chance to do more than clean floors. Her first mentee was Malik Jackson, a 27-year-old mechanic with a vision for a mobile auto repair service. Malik was wary, his arms crossed during their first meeting. "I know who you are," he said bluntly. "Why should I trust you?" Margaret met his gaze, her voice steady. "You shouldn't. Not yet. But let me prove I'm here to help." She dove into Malik's business plan, teaching him how to negotiate contracts, manage cash flow, and build a client base, using her old industry contacts, those who hadn't abandoned her. She connected him with a supplier willing to offer discounted parts. Malik's business, Jackson's Mobile Fix, took off, landing its first major contract within weeks. Margaret felt a flicker of pride. a sensation she hadn't known in years. Her next mentee was Sarah Coleman, the young mother who had glared at her on that first day. Sarah dreamed of opening a bakery, but her lack of capital and know-how had kept her stuck. Margaret spent late nights with her, drafting budgets and navigating health regulations. When Sarah secured a small business grant, Margaret was there, helping her sign the paperwork. "You're good at this," Sarah admitted. Reluctantly, after their first successful pitch to a local investor, Margaret smiled faintly. "I've had practice." But the real test came with Destiny Williams, a 20-year-old single mother who wanted to start a tutoring program for at-risk youth. Destiny was blunt. "You called people like me names," she said, her voice sharp. "Why are you here now, acting like you care?" Margaret took a deep breath, choosing honesty over defensiveness. "I was wrong. I was hateful, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I'm not asking for your trust. I'm asking for a chance to show I'm different." Destiny's skepticism lingered, but she agreed to work together. They spent months refining Destiny's vision, securing a lease for a small storefront, and applying for grants. When Destiny's tutoring haven opened its doors, Margaret was there, painting walls alongside volunteers. Her hands blistered, but her heart lighter as the 6-month mark approached. Margaret stood before Judge Carter for her review hearing. The transformation was striking. Gone was the arrogant woman who had terrorized her neighbors. In her place was someone quieter, humbler, her face lined with the weight of her past, but softened by effort. Malik testified first, describing how Margaret's guidance had turned his dream into a business employing 3 people. Sarah spoke of the bakery now serving her community, crediting Margaret's relentless support. But it was Destiny's words that silenced the room. "She didn't just help me build a tutoring center," Destiny said, her voice steady. "She showed me that people can change, that hate doesn't have to win." "She's not the same person." She was. James, seated quietly in the back, nodded when asked if Margaret had met his conditions. "She's proven redemption is possible," he said. "Her actions speak louder than any apology could." Judge Carter, visibly moved, reduced Margaret's charges and restored Hensley & Sons eligibility for state contracts. Starting with a modest project to renovate the Frederick Douglass Community Center 1 year after the ruined wedding. Estates buzzed with life as James and Emily hosted a neighborhood barbecue to celebrate their first anniversary. The backyard, once a battlefield, was now a vibrant tapestry of faces, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all mingling under string lights. Malik was there, showing off photos of his new repair van. Sarah's bakery had catered the desserts, and her cinnamon rolls were a hit among the kids. Destiny brought her toddler, named Joy, who toddled through the crowd, chasing balloons. And there, in a simple sundress, was Margaret, serving lemonade and chatting with neighbors. She approached James and Emily as the evening wound down, her voice soft. "Thank you," she said, her eyes glistening. "Not just for today, but for believing I could be better." James smiled, his arm around Emily. "You did the work, Margaret. You chose to change." Emily nodded, her gaze warm. "This is what healing looks like, not just for you, but for all of us." The barbecue became a symbol of something greater, a community reborn from the ashes of division. Margaret's journey, once a footnote to a scandal, was now a story of hope shared in local papers and community forums. It wasn't perfect, some neighbors still whispered. Some wounds lingered, but it was progress. Margaret had learned to see her neighbors as people, not threats, and in doing so, she had rebuilt herself. James and Emily, their love unbroken by the trials of that day, stood as beacons of resilience. As the stars emerged over Greenview Estates, the laughter and music carried a truth hate could destroy. But forgiveness could rebuild, and love could transform even the most broken hearts into something whole.